Good evening, everybody. My name is Jacob Ross, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm Oceana's Mid-Atlantic Field Representative here in Washington, D.C., and it is my absolute pleasure to share with you a story of how to create community in the face of environmental racism during tonight's Ocean Steward Spotlight with our special guest, Delegate Wanika Fisher. In a few minutes, we're going to start talking to this awesome human being, but before that, I wanted to share with you a little bit about Oceana and our Ocean Steward Spotlight series. Oceana, founded in 2001, is the largest international advocacy organization focused solely on ocean conservation. Our offices around the world work together to win strategic, directed campaigns, and we seek to achieve measurable outcomes that will help make our oceans more biodiverse and abundant. The purpose of the Ocean Steward Spotlight series is to recognize the people who are broadening the conservation movement. The series is a commitment to all our partners in the conservation community who make our collective success possible. Before we start the interview, I want to pause and acknowledge Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month and the Stop Asian Hate movement. Amy Fry from Ward 6 is a council member from Cheverly, Maryland, who helped organize the local community to acknowledge and fight Asian hate. You can find her at Fry Ward 6 on Facebook, and we encourage you to support her work. Now, let me introduce Delegate Fisher. Delegate Fisher is the proud daughter of immigrants who started early in politics by distributing petitions for better neighborhood sidewalks. Delegate Wanika Fisher represents District 46B in Prince George's County, Maryland. She's the Assistant Majority Leader in the Maryland House of Delegates, the Prince George's County House Delegation Caucus Chair, and serves on several impressive work groups and legislative caucuses. As a member of the Maryland General Assembly since January 2019, an attorney and a passionate equity advocate, Delegate Fisher's leadership extends to her community. She serves the Young Democrats of Prince George's County, the University of Maryland College Park Alumni Association Board of Governors, and the Lewisdale Civic Association. She is also a passionate environmental justice advocate, and she has been using her voice to try and win a Maryland constitutional amendment to offer environmental rights to every Marylander. On top of all of that, she's also active in her congregation at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Hyattsville and a major fan of Maryland Terps, football, and basketball. We are so grateful to Delegate Fisher for making the time to join us and share her message of facing environmental racism and creating community. Well, Delegate Fisher, let's dive right in to getting to know you. Can you tell us about the moment that you knew that you wanted to fight for the environment?
Thank you, Jacob, first of all, for having me tonight, and thank you to all the members of Oceana and all the work that you all do to support great legislation, to support the environment, our communities, and people. So it really means a lot. It's great to be here. It was really funny because when I was reflecting on this moment, the moment I really knew, for those of you that are millennials or Gen Xers, there used to be a show called Nick News, and with Linda Elderby, and I think I was in like 12 or 13, and there was an episode about pollution in our oceans, actually, and there was a turtle that had a lot of bumps and raises, and like the reaction from that episode, and the fact that the turtle ended up going blind with all the lesions on the skin, really was the moment that I was like, I can't believe we're hurting these amazing creatures. And so it really got me involved in the environment. And then as I got older and just faced different inequities and looking at the health disparities due to environmental issues, really got me involved. And that story is really funny to me as well, because I'm always really connected to turtles. As a Terp, it's a turtle, and I've always had this sort of special relationship. And I always say, like, turtles are, sort of the historians, in the sense that they live so long and they've seen a lot. And I always sort of had that in the back of my mind on, it's not just us who are going to remember our legacy, but the environment around us, whether it's plants or animals, that are going to not only some outlive us and will remember the things that we do and that we don't do.
Yeah, it's almost a spiritual connection seeing a turtle. I've been snorkeling before and seeing all of that wildlife. It is just really impactful. But I wanted to just pause for a second from some of our questions, Delegate Fisher, because You have such an impressive resume, and you are doing so much to help Marylanders all over the state, and especially in your district. And we've been through a very difficult year with racial justice, various social justice issues, environmental issues. And I think I'm just curious, I'm sure other folks are curious, what keeps you going? You're doing so much in such a difficult time for our country. I'm just curious, what lights that fire?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a rough times. I think a lot of things, my faith is probably the number one thing that keeps me going, gives me strength during my time, whatever, faith you are, religion or not, something, or spiritual, whatever it is for people, for me, that has always kept me strong. And then I think just really leaning into the good in people. As much as this year has been extremely trying, I represent, for those in Maryland, I'm in Prince George's, I represent the Lewisdale, Langley Park, Adelphi community, and that zip code, 20783, is the highest hit zip code of COVID contraction in our entire state. So my district has really been hit really hard. And I think the one thing that's helped me is we've been hit really hard, but I've never seen our community come together so much. I've never seen us lean on each other, and the best of people have really shined during a time of crisis. Several of our local churches have been food distribution centers. We've had community cleanups. We've had ad hoc sort of vaccine rollouts and testing rollouts, and just the sheer nature and the willpower to get through it together has really been inspiring. And then I think like everyone, really just leaning on your family and friends and feeling cherished and those that love you and care about you, and being a part of their journey and support. And then I think more personally too, the pandemic, especially being quarantined, and I'm blessed that I don't have a job that I have to be on the front lines. And I'm so thankful because a lot of frontline workers are in my district, cashiers, our food service folks and others, or, and then for medical folks, as an attorney, I was able to work from home and court was on Zoom and things like that. It was able to reflect on me. I really took a big dive into my health. I lost a significant amount of weight. I stopped drinking wine every night. I really tried to focus on being the best me I could be, especially when health was just such a crisis. It was hard to sit with the other choices I was making. I was trying to lean into I can choose what I'm eating. I can choose how much I'm exercising. I can choose those type of things. I can do all I can to avoid and not get COVID-19 and protect myself. But what are all the other health choices we are making? And honestly, being honest about, a lot of the folks, not everyone, but a certainly significant amount of folks that either died to COVID-19 or had a horrible recovery, had a lot of pre-existing conditions. So it really just inspired me to just lean in. I mean, we all want to be better. I still have a health journey in front of me, but just being able to start that, and it can be hard in public service to be selfish. It can be hard to be I'm going to focus on me. I'm not going to take calls, and I am going to do this. And so being quarantined gave me the space to do that.
I think you're talking to a lot of people right now who are involved in trying to make our country a better place. And so I think that message resonated with me, and I'm sure it resonated with a lot of folks in our audience. And just one of the benefits of this work is creating that sense of community. Whatever the community, large or small, and coming around the issues of conserving the ocean has been so powerful. And I wanted to read a bit of it from the Maryland Environmental Human Rights Amendment website that I found. It says that each person has a fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment, including clean air, water, and land. Would you mind explaining that connection between the Environmental Human Rights Amendment and environmental justice for you?
Yeah, I think so for me, the main connection with that is that it's hard to get justice if someone doesn't have a right or something innate for that. And so creating, passing an environmental rights amendment onto our Constitution really creates the reality of, and creates the standard of what we all deserve. And in order to get to justice, we sort of have to know where justice is. And I think that can also be really hard. So when you know the standard, you know everyone has a right to a healthy and clean environment, right to breathe clean air, to have clean drinking water, to, you know, all of those things. We know what it is when it's not right, when it's not equitable, when it's not fair. And so I think that to me was a huge connection. Representing, you know, I represent the largest immigrant community in the state of Maryland. You know, coming from a diverse background myself, I can see just the environmental impacts that happen in Black and Brown communities. And I think having a constitutional amendment in Maryland about what people deserve, and that you have a right to a healthy environment, and that should be a part of what every agency does, and what all people are doing when they're thinking about policy, when they're thinking about building, when they're thinking about regulations, changes the mindset. And I think you have to change the mindset to get to a place of justice. I think, you know, when I think about whether it's like the civil rights movement, when I think about the LGBTQ movement in this country, a lot of it we had to change hearts before we changed people's minds. And I think it's very similar with the environment. I think it's a similar blueprint of, you know, you have to change people's relation to what they deserve in the environment and what it is. People are actually, especially in disproportionate minority communities, are used to living in substandard conditions. They don't really even, I mean, for people on this call, it might seem very reasonable, very innate, that of course I have a right to clean air and clean water and the environment, because we're sort of in this space. But if you went and talked to some of my constituents, that would not even be like a thought in their minds that they have a right to a clean environment. Like, they're just thinking about paying bills, I have a place to sleep, like, am I safe? And like, that's kind of where it is. And I think, and you can see the long-term health impacts of that. And so I think this is really a part of an awakening of what is our relationship with the environment around us, and helping us get to that road of environmental justice.
Well said. And what do you think your constituents would say about the state? You know, Oceana, we work on mostly ocean issues. What would you say your constituents say about the state of the ocean? And is there a message that you would hope to get across to them about what maybe the state could be doing better to protect our waterways and our oceans, either vis-a-vis other legislation or vis-a-vis this environmental human rights amendment?
Right. I think they would be concerned, you know, huge concerns. So the Anacostia watershed is in our district. And as anyone, if you're familiar with Maryland, I've got a little Maryland, my Maryland side above my head. You know, the Chesapeake Bay, we're super proud, and the conservation of the bay, which obviously connects to the greater ocean, is important to us. And I think in Maryland, you know, we are a seafood sort of centric state. Even in Prince George's County, you know, there's literally like an amazing crab place, like not far from my house. You wouldn't even think of it in like the middle of my district, but it's like, I think it's very much a part of people's consciousness of taking care of the ocean and the connection to food and healthy water and our marine life and things of that nature. And I think one of the biggest things that hurts folks, just to speak locally about my district, is seeing trash and things of that in the street and having that being washed into our water system is probably the most direct thing I would say that my constituents are concerned about. So things like a ban on plastic bags in our state and bills of that nature, I would say, because I don't border, my district doesn't border the ocean directly or water directly, but a lot of our state does. And then the fact that the Anacostia watershed feeds in to these other big, whether it's the ocean or the bay, is important. And I think the everyday issue in my district is pollution and trash in the street and how that's affecting our waterways, especially for the Anacostia River, which is throughout my district. So that's, I think, the most important thing on their minds. And when I talk about, you know, my legislation and others, it's ways to give our state tools to move us forward. Because no matter how much you're picking it up, it's coming back. If you don't keep, you know, which I feel like I do community cleanup like every month, and no matter what you do, you have to change like the industry standard and the culture around trash in our communities. So like every day, the things that we do, because the reality is not one organization, I wouldn't say not even one regulatory agency can do this alone. It's going to take regulation with an investment from the people and a change in the mindset and in our everyday behaviors that are going to make a long-term difference.
Absolutely, that's so well said. I like to say, you know, when talking about offshore drilling, because we were under a more imminent threat from offshore drilling under the previous administration, and now we are sort of in a position to ask Congress to ban offshore drilling permanently. And one of the things I love to say is, you know, imagine not being able to go grab a crab dinner around the street because there's oil washing up all over the shores of Maryland. No one wants that. I think you brought up a really great point. Is kind of like giving the state of Maryland tools to do the right thing when it comes to the ocean. And when we go to do that, we're often fighting institutions, right? Oceana, we love to say, like, if your bathtub is overflowing with water, you don't run for a mop to mop up the floor, you turn off the faucet. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is turn off that faucet on plastic pollution. And you mentioned at the state level, the plastic bag bill that we're working on in Maryland that unfortunately didn't pass this year. We hope that it will be reintroduced and pass again in the next session. But with the environmental human rights amendment as well, we're asking institutions that have traditionally not been very inclusive to listen to these voices, right? And so this is sort of a question for folks who have been in the environmental community for a while. How do you envision the environmental movement or the conservation movement sort of evolving in the future as we continue to ask institutions to change?
I think I envision it, and with this bill especially too, is sort of broadening that umbrella on who's housed in that movement and building coalitions of support. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about a constitutional amendment, which will give people the ability to sue on behalf of others, is that we're a very litigious society, sadly. And when someone knows they're going to be facing a lawsuit for something, they think twice about it, and they look at it in a different way. And I think for the conservation movement, I think it's really about helping the movement align its priorities with other movements and other groups that it might not seem like it makes sense at first, or it seem a strange relationship, but we all have like the same goal of living like a healthy, peaceful life while we're on this planet. And I think you can find ways to coalition build and connect. And I think that that's going to be where the movement goes long term to see the change. I think that we want to see, and to make different environmental bills an actual priority. Even when it comes to my bill or that I did with Senator Patterson, let me make sure I give him credit, my cross-file on that, Senator Patterson, Prince George's County, or the plastic ban bill, which Delegate Learman and my state senator, Senator Augustine, has worked on. You have to build coalitions not only across the aisle, across racial groups, areas, in order to make this a priority. Because the reality is, one person saying they want something in politics is not always enough. You need multiple people saying that they want something. And I think, Oceana having a similar legislative priority as the state Maryland NAACP would be for example, just would be like a great coalition of saying, wow, these really vibrant communities want to see this bill change in Maryland for a really great reason. Let's go forward and do that together. And I think that makes politicians sort of wake up and pay attention and be like, what's going on? That Oceana and NAACP are both asking us for the same thing. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that will help the movement reach its goals.
Absolutely. And so we're talking about widening the umbrella of the movement. What do you think is the best path forward? Like, if there were a strategy or a path for people to take who maybe are calling in from some of our other states across the country, they're interested in doing an environmental human rights amendment, and maybe if you wanted to expand on the amendment itself, but what advice would you give to folks who are kind of working within state coalitions to make the environment more of a core institutional issue?
I think the first, so that's a big question, but the first thing I would say is take an inventory of yourself. I would first say, look at what are your priorities and what can you live without. I think some of the biggest mistakes I've seen just sitting, I'll put my politician hat on, not my advocacy hat on. Some of the biggest mistakes I've seen amazing progressive movements, groups, incentives, whatever, not incentives, priorities and goals fail is that they're on too many bills. And it's too many things, and and it's not very clear what exactly their goals are. So once you know exactly what your goals are, that you think you can, and in those goals, you have to have a variety of things. I always say, have a dream thing. It's kind of like when you apply to college. Have a dream goal, it would be great goal, and have something you can get, right? Have three or more than that, but just sort of have sort of a variation, I would say, about what you think politically can happen. And then start meeting, and don't stop meeting. I think it's really about just thinking about my own state and those that are watching from other states, figuring out what politicians or people or sponsors would be great for the legislation or the priorities you want. For just to do the example, as you were talking about, was my environmental rights amendment. I have to give credit to my great colleague, Delegate Steward, had that bill before me. And he and I were talking about it. He knew I had a passion for environmental issues, even though I'm in the Judiciary Committee because of all the law stuff I do. And he was like, Wanika, I think you'd be a better face for this bill. He was like, you would be able to kind of, so it was like he himself was selfless and wanted me to sort of take over the issue, to give the issue a different framework. So I think it's definitely okay to reevaluate. Even though you might have a champion in your state, and that person might be amazing, but if your bill's died 5 sessions, it might be time to relook at it, right? And I think it can be hard. I feel like I'm amongst friends here. It can be really hard as advocates. You work so hard, the people, especially in more conservative states, there are worse states than Maryland, that you have your champions and they're amazing. But if you can find a way to get that Republican majority leader to be a part of this bill, then you need to find that way. And so I think it's about having a real, introspective look. Some communities say a come to Jesus moment about like what's happening with your bill. It might be a sponsor problem. It might be a coalition problem. It might be a budgetary problem. Working that out, and again, building a broader support than what you have. I think I think that to me is super critical to move environmental issues forward. In any state, I think, because I think a lot of groups, and I think with the human nature is like we think of ourselves and sort of like the environment, even though it directly affects us, and like we couldn't even be on this Zoom call without healthy air and all the things to just be alive in this moment. That's not what like humans innately think about. We think about our own like well-being, and our stomach and shelter and things like that. So sometimes I think it can feel like, who's really asking for this? And I think it's important to lay out, whatever state you're in, a diverse group of folks that are asking for something that are affecting their environment, because you all have a stakeholder in it. Versus other bills can be very specific, like, let's just talk about education. Education, who's asking for it? Kids. Everybody knows that, right? It's about kids, it's about students, our school system. Everyone knows like the school system affects housing values and all those things. The environment has to also, I think the movement, and this is kind of like a national conversation, not even just like an Oceana conversation, about having those stories that average Americans sort of know. The environment affects this. I think water is a huge one. And I think Oceana being focused on like our oceans and the cleanliness and like attaching oceans to drinking water in a very sort of simple way that regular folks can understand also really helps the movement when they're just simple like cause and effect, right? Whether you look at every other movement, we're talking about like civil rights, or we're talking about like LGBTQ rights, or we're talking about like Black Lives Matter movement right now. It was like, African Americans couldn't vote. They want to vote, so let's help them vote, right? It was like a simple correlation. Or like, obviously segregation. We were segregated. We're not, okay, right? You don't have the right to marry or enter in certain unions or have access to things in our tax code. Now you do. Like, people need that. And Black Lives Matter. Okay, we're being killed by police. Let's stop African Americans being killed by police. Like, there's a lot of more intricacies, I mean, I could sit here and talk to you all about police reform for like 5 hours, but because it's like all I did this session or for the last 3 years of my life. But I think that's what's a little bit more complicated about our movement is that I think the message of cause and effect and like a simple sort of message to people can get lost because there are so many things, there are so many groups, and there's so many different goals. So I think as the movement and the future of it starts to streamline, I think that will be very, very helpful. I mean, you know, Maryland, we're a state that banned fracking. You know, there are certain issues that are like really, and I think like banning fracking was really simple. Like it was like ban fracking, right? Like that's the bill. You know, I think the bag bill, I think is going to be successful. I am very supportive of it in Maryland, and I think it's going to get there because we had so many issues. People wanted to tax it. You could have this or that. It was going to be you know, and it does in the bill. It does have like a, you know, a gradual date. You can use what you have, but you have to pay the state. But the earlier versions were too complicated. You know what? We're just not doing it. That's the bill. You see how like much easier that is for like our constituents to understand what's happening, for the politician to understand what's happening, and for you to sort of build that coalition of support. And it took a couple of, I can just speak to Maryland, Jacob, it took a couple of delineations that I saw to get to that point in this last sort of election cycle, I would say from like 2016 to now, to be like, we're just going to do straight ban. And I think, and so I think as those issues, and because the environment has so many different ones, become cleaner and more crisp on the cause and effect and why it's hurting our communities, and that's communicated, I think you'll see success.
I love that. And one of the things I love about this work is that we get the opportunity to come together as communities and have those conversations, right? And see the light switch on for people when we talk about policy analysis and what's the best bill that we can put forward? Is it simple? Is it clean? What's the best message that we can have and come together? And so you are among friends, yes. And it's, one of the things I love about the Maryland Coalition that Oceana works with on plastic pollution in particular is we are there to support each other and kind of bounce these ideas off each other. And I just encourage anyone who's at all questioning whether or not to get involved in state legislation, you know, talk to Delegate Fisher, talk to folks like Oceana and other organizations that are having these hard conversations about how to change institutions to make them a little bit more equitable or environmentally friendly. And we're approaching the end of our time together, unfortunately, but we have about 5 minutes and I wanted to kind of block this off to open it up. You know, environmental racism and environmental justice are obviously two things that are very important to you. What would you like to say, just kind of open opportunity for folks in general on that topic that you're so passionate about?
Sure, I will. Sorry, I was so long with my answers, Jacob, tonight. I would just say, you know, for me as a Black woman, identify as an Indian woman, I'm biracial, like our Vice President Kamala Harris, and you know, my community is going through a lot. If I can just speak from the heart, you know, my brothers and sisters are being killed by police. I think you're going to see, you know, in Maryland, Black women are so much more. I think they're about 3.9 times likelier to be evicted than a white man. And when it comes to like the eviction crisis and COVID, I represent a huge Latino community that's dealing with fear, ICE deportation, housing issues, health issues, access issues. The environment is critical, but especially for communities of color, there's a lot going on. And there's a lot of things that are more direct, they're happening right in the moment, that are literally taking our children away from us, that I think you might see politicians or African-American advocates more focused on. And so I think it's just so important to know and to not feel anxiety or fear or an insensitivity to approach folks in your home state, for those of you not in Maryland, or here at home about these issues. You know, Senator Patterson and I were both, you know, Black politicians from Prince George's County, a predominantly Black jurisdiction, and we care about the environment, and we both did this bill. So even though there's a lot going on, because we know the environment's affecting our community, it's just a bandwidth issue. It's not a heart issue. So the heart is there for all of these issues, but the bandwidth for our community when it comes to our constituents and us as the politicians can be difficult. And so, you know, I've got to thank, you know, Rabbi Cardin. She really helped me. She's like a leader on this bill. And others, that the advocates on this bill helped me and Senator Patterson present the best bill we possibly could, and we're such a vital support. So I just encourage anyone, when you're talking about environmental issues, the disproportionate impact in our community when it comes to asthma, people on dialysis, other issues are affecting our community. We want to be a part of that change. We just need, maybe sometimes we need other people to extend their hand and to hold hands in it together, you know? So I would just encourage people on the call, my last word, don't feel afraid to ask, to reach out, to share a hand, and to ask people into the camp, you know, to be a part of it, because it really does affect our communities and we really do care. And we want to work together to see a difference.
Delegate Fisher, thank you again so much for taking the time to join us. And, you know, on that, I also encourage folks within our community of environmental conservation to share the mic also with folks that they haven't, you know, talked with before, or are interested in getting involved in creating these wider coalitions. I think sharing the microphone, including another organization on your press release, inviting them to a planning meeting, inviting them to a presentation, you know, I think that speaks volumes. And I really love what you said about the heart is there, because that's been my experience as well. And I think that's a wonderful kind of mantra to come back to as we continue to learn about how to continue to broaden our movement. And for folks who want to support Delegate Fisher, you can find her at Wanika Fisher MD. But I want to let you speak to your social media handles real quick, because I don't think we got each one here.
Oh, that's okay. So on Twitter, it's Wanika Fisher. What's good is like nobody has my first name, so that's great. Twitter is Wanika Fisher. Facebook, I believe, is at Wanika Fisher ND, and then Instagram, you're on Instagram, is also Wanika Fisher. So if you put in any social, honestly, you put Wanika Fisher in any social media handle, I'm pretty much the first or the second person to pop up. I haven't met another Wanika in person yet, so waiting to meet my name doppelganger somewhere.
Got you on the gram. Delegate Fisher, thank you so very much. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Catch us again at the next Ocean Steward Spotlight, which is May the 27th with Green Latinos. Very excited for that. Delegate Fisher, thanks again, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Oceana.